everybody. It's so great to be here. Great to be doing another Q&A. It's always a pleasure to have these sessions. And if you've ever been to one of our Q&A sessions, you know that they happen every month, and we try to spend an hour answering all of your questions. So let's see, just silencing my notifications as we dig into this. Okay. Great. So it is, really always a pleasure whenever we're in Black History Month to talk about all of our just wonderful events and activities that happen alongside this particular month. But of course, today's theme is all about celebrating Black History Month now and in the future. So I'm excited to jump right in. First, let me, as always, introduce myself. I'm like so excited every time we do these sessions because this is the work that I have been doing for the last 10 years. My name is Natalia. If you don't know me, just a quick intro. I did diversity, equity, and inclusion work at places like Facebook, now Meta, and Teach for America. I also have some degrees that are fairly relevant to this work, having studied oppressive political systems and thinking about organizational effectiveness and inclusive leadership through my MBA at Wharton. And then, of course, now I get to lead the wonderful team at C Network. And it is always such a pleasure to be able to do that because we have a lovely crew that works together to help support clients of all sizes, in all industries with their diversity, equity, and inclusion needs. So you can learn more about us at cnetwork.com. Also, obviously, this is not about us. This is about Black History Month and how we can support it. And while you start thinking about your questions and decide what to post, I'm actually going to share a little bit about Black History Month just to get you warmed up and to get your brain in the zone. But while I'm speaking, this is your time to get some questions in the chat so that I can start answering them once I'm done. So again, I just want to take a moment to talk a little bit about the work that we've done to support Black History Month in the past. Let me share with you this blog post that this time of year gets quite a bit of traffic. Maybe you got a chance to take a look at this blog post that we made a couple of years ago as well. It's the 10 mistakes companies make when celebrating Black History Month. And we often see that people are reading through these or watching the video to learn more about the 10 mistakes or mistakes generally that we see companies make when they're celebrating Black History Month. So this Q&A session is not about mistakes, it's about how to do it and all of the great things that you can continue to do to celebrate the month effectively. But I thought we would anchor this discussion in this conversation with this blog and with the topic of the 10 mistakes, because this can get us kind of out of the way, talking about these mistakes first, and then jumping into all of the ways that you can celebrate. So here are the ones that were listed in the blog, and I encourage you to read for more details. We have throwing something together at the last minute. Hopefully that's not what's happening for you. And we know we're pretty early in the month, but hopefully you've had a little bit of planning that you were doing beforehand. If not, no judgment. We'll talk through ways that you can recover if you are throwing things together last minute. Assuming that this month is just for Black employees, it's not. This month is a time to center your Black employees and to make sure that everything you do is geared in the direction that they dictate. However, this is an opportunity for everyone to get involved, just like diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts should never just be on those who are most marginalized in workplaces. You'll want to make sure that it's a company-wide effort, as this says. Not elevating those from the community, you'll want to make sure that you're elevating those voices. You'll want to make sure that you're not celebrating publicly, but not internally. You'll want to make sure that you're celebrating both internally and externally. And the next mistake says something similar, where we see sometimes people doing things internally and not telling people, but why? You can read more about it here. Then there's, of course, not recognizing the complexity of the Black community, recognizing that it's not a one-dimensional experience, and there is a ton of intersectionality within the Black community. Yes, you'll have Black employees who also identify as women, for example, or who also identify as LGBTQ, or who also identify as Latinx. And so, the list goes on. And so thinking about that is really important. Just celebrating well-known Black leaders is also a mistake we see. Don't just pick the ones that everybody knows. Go ahead and learn more about Black history and expand that for your company. Not involving Black-owned businesses is another mistake we see. You'll want to make sure that they're involved. And then only celebrating Black History Month. There are other great months throughout the calendar year that we know a lot of DEI experts are always thinking about and ensuring that the calendar for the company is set up. And that's important. You'll want to make sure that this isn't the only time you celebrate. And then confining the celebration to just 1 month, assuming that, oh, we celebrated Black History Month, February is over, and now we're done. That is not the way we want this to go, which is why today's session is all about celebrating Black History Month and beyond, in February and beyond. Let's talk about it. Okay, I see a couple of questions coming through, which is great. Go ahead and get those questions in. We'll want to make sure that we're answering them, and that is the goal. I also will not be saying people's names as you post. We'll keep it anonymous. So feel free to ask your questions. You don't have to be concerned about, you can also indicate that you want it to be anonymous so that I can't even see your name. Just go ahead. This is the time to just get your answers to these questions. Okay. What do we have here? What kind of events, activities do you recommend for celebrating Black History Month? My company hasn't scheduled anything yet, and I feel like we're really behind. Okay, hi, whoever submitted this question. It sounds like you're falling into your company is falling into that first mistake of maybe planning things a little like last notice or late notice. That's okay. We live and we learn. And especially you, they're very lucky to have someone like you who's thinking about this right now and who's very intentional about trying to get something on the calendar. So if you're asking what kinds of events and activities you can do to celebrate Black History Month, it really runs across the gamut. We see a lot of events focused on different categories and it runs across the board. So what you might want to consider, for example, is having an event that really centers your Black employees. So maybe it's an event where storytelling is a featured component. Maybe it's an event where food and bringing in the different cultural aspects of the community is a featured component. Maybe having a potluck, or really celebrating, having a bunch of different restaurants that are Black-owned restaurants bringing their food and having an event maybe toward the end of this month so that you can coordinate all of those things if people are in person. So it could be a kind of cultural celebration that's centered around that storytelling piece and all of that. It can also be a community-driven activity, right? Where maybe you're supporting an organization that serves predominantly Black communities out in the community outside of your workplace. Or maybe it's raising money or doing something that allows you to do that community service work with the Black community externally. We also see sometimes something that maybe is more educational be the focus of a Black History Month event. So maybe it's an educational opportunity for people to learn more about a particular point in history or an experience. Maybe it's a movie night, or maybe it's something that people are reading through and learning more about through the different books that you have available. Maybe you purchase a bunch of books for people, and that's the way that you go about it. There are so many different things that I could recommend for celebrating Black History Month. And so my hope is that you'll find this to be really useful for even in this late notice kind of time that you have. Okay, next question. How much emphasis should be given to the history of Black History Month? Should companies seek to highlight more contemporary examples? Interesting question. I always say that there should be a little bit of both, because we're writing history as we exist, right? And there is beauty in celebrating the impact of those who are contemporary and still living and really doing amazing things. Unfortunately, there are still barriers to break, right? And so we still see people really making those strides today or in the recent history. And it's important to recognize that really just amazing and compelling time in the past, as well as what's happening today and how we're seeing Black voices and Black people come to the forefront. So I would say do a mixture of both. Black History Month allows for us to look back at that history and learn more, but it also allows us to move into that next phase of recognizing how much work there still is to do. Great, next one. There are so many wonderful celebratory months, including Black History. How do we know which to focus on so it doesn't seem performance-based and inauthentic? Thank you for asking that question. I always say that it's helpful for you when you're first starting out with your company, thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion across the calendar, to mark the major months that are most often celebrated, perhaps the ones that you know will be very much on your employees' minds during that time. So that's where I would start. So for example, Black History Month, your employees will likely be looking for and hoping for some sort of acknowledgement of the fact that it is Black History Month. The same might be true for your Pride Month, right? Where your LGBTQ plus employees might be expecting some sort of acknowledgement of that. Maybe there are some other months that are less notable, that people are less aware of, right? But looking at the ones that your employees are really interested in. There's like Disability Month. There are so many different ways or Women's History Month. There's so many different ways that your employees might be looking for direction and for an acknowledgement. And so I would start by really honing in on the ones where your employees are looking for something during that time of year, starting there, getting yourself started, and then over time adding to it, because obviously there are so many just wonderful events, and sometimes they're not months, sometimes they're individual days, right? That are important to different people within your organization. But if you're wondering, how do I do this in a way that's authentic and not performative? Follow and listen to what your employees are saying and start small with the big ones that you know are very much in people's minds, and then grow progressively from there. Okay, next question. My company has planned weekly emails highlighting Black leaders for the month of February. We sent the first one out last week and we haven't seen a lot of engagement through that. Is 4 such emails going to be too much? Some people might be more engaged in that kind of content than others, and that's totally fine. In my mind, it's always best to do something and to make sure that you're really putting your best foot out there when it comes to celebrating these days, especially if this is something your company is new to. It might take some time for your employees to know how to engage with this content, or for your employees to know what to expect of this kind of content. And that's completely natural and something that we see all the time. We do sometimes see some low engagement in some of these activities and opportunities to start, and that's okay. What I do encourage you to do, though, is to interrogate how you can make your emails, if this is your major campaign, how you can make them more engaging rather than considering stopping them, right? So maybe there's a way for you to spotlight different employees, your Black employees, maybe for each of those emails, in addition to highlighting Black leaders that are out there, in the world being great leaders, you're also highlighting Black leaders within your company. And that kind of spotlight can also offer some additional engagement, because maybe that person who's very proud to be featured can also share it with their friends, and other people want to support them because they know them, and it will increase that engagement. So again, this is something we see often with companies that are brand new to celebrating Black History Month or any other identity-based month or activity or day. And rather than slow down or stop, I would say think of ways to make it more exciting for them, because hopefully this is only the beginning for you, right? And not the start of something that you're feeling like, oh no, we shouldn't have done this. Great. Hopefully that was helpful. What are your opinions of teams highlighting their African American employees during February? Are then any potential repercussions they should be worried about? Are there any potential repercussions they should be worried about? Yeah, well, I mean, you'll want to make sure that this is the and beyond piece, right? That we're talking about with this particular Q&A. Often what ends up happening, and we don't want to have happen, is that people make a huge effort to really spotlight employees that identify with a particular month, whether it be like Latinx Heritage Month or Pride Month or what have you, and will not spotlight people for the rest of the year, or will not be intentional about how inclusive their list of spotlit employees is throughout the whole year. And so there's a real danger, especially with Black employees, that we think, oh, we did that in February, so we don't really have to think about it anymore, about this idea of representation across the year. And of course, that's not what you want to have happen. So it's totally fine to highlight your Black employees and during the month of February in some special way. It's also important, though, that you think about throughout your experience building community with your employees. How are you building that community with your employees consistently throughout the year, and consistently in a way that makes it so that everyone knows that they have themselves represented, or they have a chance to be represented in that way? Thank you for that question. Okay, let's see. Our CEO and marketing director are really reluctant to get active with Black History Month content because they think it's inauthentic as a historically white institution. I can see why. I'm one of 2 Black employees out of over 150. How can I help them to navigate what is and isn't appropriate for a company like ours? For an organization that's just getting started and really trying to do the work internally, which is what it sounds like your company needs, and hopefully is what your company is doing, you'll want to make sure that you're starting with a clear understanding of where you are as a company. So if your company is at this place where it really does not have very much Black representation, we definitely want to make sure that the company is emphasizing the importance of Black History Month and emphasizing the importance of celebrating it in its public activities and in terms of how the events that it plans. But what it will also need to do is invest in engagements and initiatives that really speak to where the company is right now. So what I mean is that sometimes when we talk about Black History Month, all we think about are the events, the really flashy things that happen on people's websites, the different panels and speaking series that come through, and those can be a lot of fun and really great. But when you're at an organization where there are very few Black people, what you also want to do for Black History Month is take a good hard look at yourself. And so I appreciate that the CEO and marketing director within this organization is sensitive to where it currently sits within that dynamic. However, I think what the next step your CEO and marketing director and others within your organization need to do, the next step is really to invest in those internal policies and those internal strategies to increase that number of Black employees within your organization, and to ensure that the 2 people that are there are feeling heard and supported and are given support in allowing for this next phase of the company to happen. So I think, just generally thinking about Black History Month, not just about the flashy thing on the website, but also about the actual work that it can induce within an organization that every February gets to take a look at itself and reckon with how much it still needs to do. So that, I think, is really the power in what you have going on right now, and what I would encourage you to tell your CEO and marketing manager as they're grappling with what they do to celebrate this. And what's great is that if they make certain changes, they might be able to include those on their website, not just in Black History Month, but beyond, right? And saying, this is how much we care about this issue, and this is how much we want to make sure that we are really living up to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, I'm a human resources business partner at my company. I've been tasked with planning and implementing corporate events. what should I be mindful of while celebrating Black History Month? There are a lot of things that you should be mindful of. One of the big things that I'll suggest right now is that you ensure that your Black employees have a real say in how your company celebrates this month. One thing that I see sometimes is that someone who's given this opportunity to lead diversity, equity, and inclusion, maybe who isn't used to having that kind of responsibility, will go and plan things often, with nothing but great intentions. But if it's done without the consultation and integration of the opinions and perspectives of those who are most impacted and those who identify with the time or the event that's being celebrated, then there can be catastrophic repercussions. Really considering the representation and identity of those who are planning this event and these events across the course of the month is incredibly important. You'll want to make sure that you're not the only one, especially if you don't identify as Black. You'll want to make sure that you're not the only one playing a role in deciding how this Black History Month looks. So you'll want to integrate that feedback. You'll want to make sure that people are involved, and then you'll want to kind of step back and make sure that the spotlight and the microphone goes to those who identify with this particular month. That is something that is just deeply important, and I hope that you continue to be mindful of as you're moving into this space. So it would mean maybe tapping your employee resource group. It would mean maybe doing a little bit of a call for those who feel strongly about Black History Month to come forward and to get a group together, a group that maybe some allies and maybe those who identify as Black, but then make sure that the Black community is what's centered. So there are other things to be mindful of, but that I think is something that we see all too often, and I want to make sure you don't do that. Okay. Is Black History Month an appropriate time to talk about allyship? I just talked about allyship, so sure. Yes. So I think there is a balance to strike here. You'll want to make sure that you're emphasizing the history of the Black American community and just really leaning into how much power there is and has been and will continue to be in that community. And because many of the engagements and events that happen around the Black History Month should involve not just Black employees, but everyone across the company. You'll want to make sure that the burden does not go to just your Black employees. You'll also want to make sure that everyone recognizes that they have a responsibility to play in elevating the power and the beauty of the month that is, or that they have a role in learning more about that history and that beauty. This is a great time to emphasize allyship and to help people think about how they want to play a role in supporting the Black community, whether they belong to it or not. So there is a bit of a balance here. You want to make sure that there is a real clear focus on a particular community, the Black community, and whatever they may be dictating as far as what they're planning and how they want to celebrate this month. But then there's also a great opportunity to ensure that this isn't just about them and that everyone is learning and engaging and growing. There are so many ways in which people learn and grow because of Black History Month. There are so many ways that people have conversations about race or about privilege that they never would have had if not for Black History Month or some of the other months that are out there that we end up taking time to focus on certain identities. And it is especially important, right, as we focus on topics like systemic racism or anti-racism, that we continue to grow and learn and continue to reflect on the history around the Black community within America. So please, yes, this is a great time to talk about allyship. Okay, I feel like I went really through that one, but this next one is a little long, so let me go ahead and read it to you. I'm a Black employee at a large organization, and I'm currently helping set up our Black History Month celebrations. While I appreciate the sentiment behind it, I find myself and others who look like me carrying most of the weight in celebrating our culture. I feel this should be more of a communal effort involving non-Black people as well. How can I initiate and engage others at my organization to get their involvement as well? So yes, this is something we see often. And in fact, just as a quick side note, what I will just encourage everyone who has the power within their company or the influence within their company to do is to find ways to reward and acknowledge and ensure that it becomes a part of a person's performance review when they take the time out of their day job to invest in these kinds of events. So definitely there's room and a necessity right now for companies and organizations and leaders to pay more attention to how much of a burden sometimes these months and these events and diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts generally can be on marginalized communities within workplaces, or how much they can be specifically on the Black community within an organization during a month like Black History Month, or across the board now that there's so much heightened focus on this. So what we are not seeing enough of is companies taking the time to acknowledge, to reward, to connect to performance reviews, these efforts, and to say, not only, great job, thank you, but also great job. You really help us create a culture here that is inclusive and a culture that is indicative of our passion and commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for that, you get this reward, this accolade, this acknowledgement, and this promotion. So that's just kind of an aside. But on top of that, I will say that for you, as you are building this effort, it will be really important for you to speak to those who are out there who are perhaps telling you that you're doing a good job. It sounds like, there are people who have suggested that you do these celebrations. It's important that you find the space and time to share with them that this is something that actually we see happen all the time. There is research out there around certain demographics playing more of a role in these kinds of activities, whether it be Black History Month impacting Black employees, or some of the cultural, social events impacting women in workplaces. Sometimes it's a combination of both. That intersectionality, gotta love it. And so if there's a way for you to share some of that research with your colleagues to help them understand that this is a broader issue, that there should be some considerations around before it gets too far or too intense on you, that's one way to start. A second way to address this would be to consider finding opportunities for you to involve allies across the board in all of these experiences. Not all of them. You might not want all of your experiences to be for allies as well, so apologies. But in some of your experiences, you'll want to find ways to involve allies. Not sure if you have a Black employee resource group, and that if that's how you have a large organization, so maybe you have a Black employee resource group. This is a great opportunity for you to leverage the other employee resource groups, recognizing that there is intersectionality, that Black people don't just kind of live in this bubble, and there are all of these other places where identity intersects. And because of that, there might be a really great opportunity for you to partner with another organization or another employee resource group, really bring them in. There might be ways for you to create events that even if you're not maybe partnering with another employee resource group, you're really calling in your allies. So that could look like creating an event that is focused on some of the complexity of identity, like maybe, parenting for Black employees. So thinking about how parenting, or thinking about how parents generally can talk about race in with their children, right? That's something that maybe is part of Black History Month celebrations or educational activities, but it's also something that's calling in all parents. I was trying to think of an umbrella identity that might really, really be a big one within your organization. Maybe not, but those are the kinds of things that I would consider doing. That way, in order to do a great job at planning that event, it would actually be really beneficial for you to have a couple of other voices besides just the Black employees. And so thinking about that intersectionality can be a really great tactical tool. But also, please talk to your leaders about how much of an issue this is and how important it is that they put together some system-wide changes to make sure that you and others who are doing this work are getting adequately rewarded. Next question. The company I'm with is headquartered in the South, and we do celebrate aspects of Black culture regularly. For example, we had company-wide celebrations for MLK Day in January. I feel we may not need to lean into Black History Month as much. What are your thoughts? Listen, Black History Month is an opportunity to really refocus on the Black community, particularly in instances where, or within an organization or a space where there isn't a focus on the Black community as often. I do think there may be value for you to not completely discount Black History Month, because your employees will likely be expecting there to be some sort of acknowledgement. I mean, it might feel like you acknowledge MLK Day, so why not acknowledge this big month? And so I think there is value in definitely doing something, even if it's maybe a little bit more minimal compared to others. But the point of Black History Month is to help people and organizations refocus a little bit and make sure that we're putting a spotlight on a community that has historically, especially in corporate spaces, been marginalized and does not always get that spotlight. Ideally, though, the whole point of this Q&A is that ideally we are thinking about inclusion across all dimensions throughout the year, right? Ideally, we're thinking about how inclusion is something that is an imperative for every workplace. We used to talk just about diversity being an imperative and getting all of that representation into our workforces because of all the research that's around that. But we know now that in addition to diversity, we need that sense of inclusion, because you actually don't get the benefits of diversity without creating a sense of inclusion. And that's something that needs to happen all year round for all of your employees. Long story short, if you feel like you're doing great work supporting the Black community within and without your organization, then maybe you can do a little less this month. But I do encourage you to do something, because the goal is really to refocus and to make sure that everyone recognizes that you're taking the time to acknowledge the community. And then you can continue to say, hey, we do this. This is part of our DNA to acknowledge the Black community and the other communities across our employee workforce. And you can have that kind of dual conversation and dual messaging. And it can be a really powerful thing. Okay, let's see. Our company regularly highlights the achievements of individual employees throughout the course of the year. Many of these individuals happen to be African American. Would we need to highlight Celebrate Black History Month separately? This is a similar question. So it's a little similar to the last one in the sense that, like, well, we do this all year, so do we really need to? I have two points to make to this. The first is to say, sometimes I hear this from companies or their leaders, and then I talk to their employees as part of maybe a little bit of a inclusion audit, and you get the complete opposite sentiment, where it's like the leaders think, yeah, we do this all year. And employees, when you really get down to it and talk to them in an open, or confidential, but still like open forum, they'll say like, hey, there's a lot more that I feel like could be done to support me or make me feel more like I belong here. And so I want to just be very careful about the potential for some of that to happen here, because sometimes when we're living in our day-to-day, we might think that we're doing a great job of highlighting individual achievements of all employees, and that there are still some subsets of employees that do not feel like they belong or like they're heard. We also know, so that's my first point. We also know, secondly, that people of color, and especially Black people, experience quite a bit of unconscious bias in the workplace, microaggressions, just general instances of bias that may exist within an experience in work. And what we'll want to make sure of is that just by saying that we highlight all individual achievements, we're not creating a sense of minimizing those kinds of experiences and not acknowledging them when they come forward, or not creating a space or a culture where race and other aspects of identity are discussed and acknowledged and celebrated. So there is potential here for it to feel a little bit like, we do this for everyone and therefore everyone is happy, which it could be actually detrimental to those who are not getting that same experience. That said, I encourage you, yes, to consider celebrating Black History Month in addition to all the work that you're doing to highlight employee achievements, and to make sure that your highlights of employees include Black people and Black employees. I think definitely that's wonderful. But having these separate spaces where we think about new ways to educate and support our employees, it can be a really important and powerful thing, a powerful message for your employees, all of your employees, in saying that right now we're centering this particular group that historically has not been centered, especially not in this kind of way and in a corporate space. And that's what Black History Month and days like it are all about. Okay, let's see. We have time for a couple more questions. So keep them coming if you like. Hopefully this is helpful. Let's see. Many of these, okay. I see examples of big companies announcing major programs for Black talent or partnerships with Black-owned businesses. I wish I could do the same, but ours is a smaller company without tens of millions of dollars to throw around. How can we accomplish that kind of meaningful action on a smaller scale? Oh, there's so many things you can do to bring about meaningful action on a smaller scale. I want to focus maybe a little bit on the partnerships with Black-owned businesses because I've not touched on that at all. But how many services do you find yourself looking for on a regular basis, even with your smaller company, that could be actually meant for a Black-owned business? Are you, if at all, looking at your supplier diversity and thinking of the different ways that you can be strategic about it, integrating an element of diversity, supplier diversity strategy into your approach to finding different vendors for different things that you might be looking for? That is one quick way for you to really support the Black community. And maybe you won't be making a huge announcement about it. Maybe you will. But the point is that you're doing the work that really is meaningful and that your employees can see that you're making an effort in that way. So you mentioned this, like building partnerships with Black-owned businesses. And I think there are many ways for you to do that now, even on your small scale. Maybe the next time you have an in-person, meeting, just go to a restaurant that is Black-owned and get yourself some great food. That's one simple thing. And integrating that systemically into your supplier diversity strategy could be really important. Now, other things, there are all of these, major programs for Black talent that you're describing. And some of these major programs get a lot of flashy publicity. And there are things that you can do to support Black talent or prospective talent without the flashiness, right? If you're in an industry, for example, that maybe is really in need of more diversity in that industry, you could be doing some really cool work to bring in some students from maybe some historically Black colleges and universities, or maybe from a local community that serves a predominantly Black community, or a local university that serves a predominantly Black community. Or you could maybe do some sort of mentorship program with a local organization that serves a predominantly Black community. There are so many little things that you can do. And even though they might feel like they're on a much smaller scale, you'll be making a big impact. You'll be demonstrating to your employees that this is something that matters to you and to the company. And you'll be able to actually publicize it if you want. You could put it on your social media in the same way, but as we all know, that's not the goal, right? The goal is really to do the work and to ensure that your employees are learning and growing and able to help with doing some of that work, and also ensuring that your Black employees understand how important this is to you and your company. Okay, let's see. As the talent lead of a moderately sized company, I'm concerned about how to celebrate Black History Month in a way that doesn't make me feel, sorry, let's see here, in a way that doesn't make employees feel, there's a little bit of something going on this one, sorry. As the talent lead of a moderately sized company, I'm concerned about how to celebrate Black History Month in a way that doesn't make employees belonging to their identities feel ignored. Okay. How can I make sure that everyone feels like their identities are acknowledged as well? Okay, I understand what this is. I'm so sorry. Okay. How can I make sure that everyone feels like their identities are acknowledged as well? Great. This is something that I would say is part of the importance of having a bit of a calendar across your company to make sure that everyone, or that some of those major areas that your employees are hoping to be acknowledged are acknowledged. However, I think what has happened in the past is that because of this sentiment that we want to make sure that everyone feels like they're being acknowledged, we sometimes water down what we end up doing for the one group that has historically not been acknowledged very much. And so what I want to be careful of here is the possibility that in really trying to look out for everyone, we're diluting the impact and the spotlight that is currently focused on a community that has historically not had this the appropriate kind of attention. And so I want to make sure that when we're focused on a particular community, and in this case, we're talking about the Black community, we're really focused on it. And we're really making sure that we recognize that this is part of what makes us as a company an equitable company, one that cares deeply about equity, because there's an acknowledgement of the historical implication of being Black in corporate spaces or being Black in workplaces broadly, and how historically that's something that has been minimized or not spoken about or not acknowledged. Race is not something that has been talked about, at least not to the degree that it is today, right? And so what we'll want to make sure is that when it's Black History Month, we're focusing on this community in the appropriate way and not minimizing it. But when you have a calendar, and when you're not just thinking about, oh, what month is it? Okay, we have to focus on this particular group. Okay, we have to focus on this other group now. When you're thinking about not just a calendar, but a holistic DEI approach and strategy, when you're really considering how to ensure that all of your employees feel seen and valued and heard and included, and all of those great feelings that we know can drive so many positive outcomes like productivity and collaboration and retention. When that happens, then you're able to make sure that people can have a little bit of both, that people know that, okay, we are focused on this particular community this month or today, but I know that my company pays careful attention to taking care of me and my own identity, because that's something that is integral to what we do here. We are a workforce that seeks to be deeply inclusive of everyone. And I see that in the different things that my company does. So I hope that that's clear there, where it's like, we really want to make sure we don't dilute the spotlight, particularly when we think about the history of marginalization across workplace cultures. At the same time, if you're doing inclusion well, if you're really trying to build that inclusive experience for all of your employees, then there is room for you to give that spotlight while also ensuring that everyone feels included across the span of your employees' experience with you in your workplace. Okay. How can I convince the leaders at my company that we should do internal celebrations? Our company posts things about Black History Month, but it's only external, and I feel like internal is just as important. Yes, it is. I'm with you. This is one of the mistakes that I highlighted years ago on the 10 mistakes companies make blog post and video, where we see some organizations celebrating publicly but not internally. And this was actually something we saw a whole lot of when there was a resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement within corporate spaces during the summer of 2020 after George Floyd's murder. We saw a lot of companies that were posting about it, a lot of leaders that were posting about it, posting messages around the importance of anti-racism. And we also saw that there was a real need to be very careful with that kind of public posting and sentiments, because sometimes those instances of publicly sharing interest in a particular topic or in a particular community, sometimes that can backfire. If an organization is doing those things and it's not living up to what it says it wants to do, or it's not living up to the commitments or the statements that it's putting out there, it can be dangerous. It can make it so that an organization within feels hypocritical. And that's not what you want for yourself, your company, or your people. So I appreciate that this is something that is top of mind for you. And I hope that hearing a little bit about how this is not just something we see with your own company, but that we see this across companies, unfortunately, and that it has the potential to have really severe consequences, where retention can be impacted, where the experience, particularly of those who are historically underrepresented in your organization, is impacted, where there's a sense of distrust and hypocrisy that could be pervasive, more so than the sense of belonging and inclusion that you really want to have happen within an organization. So how can you convince your leaders that you should do internal celebrations? Firstly, I would make sure that they're aware of some of this history, if you're able to share that with them. Some of the ways that performative allyship has impacted companies and continues to impact companies as people are really searching for and competing for talent right now, right? So there's that bit of it. There's also the potential for you to maybe do some sort of, I don't know if what the concern is in terms of doing something small, maybe internally, and starting small. You can figure out what ways to bring people together in an internal capacity, have people have conversations about how they feel about this time of year, or even do some sort of, sharing campaign, whether it be like a storytelling, again, activity or something like that. Like, I think if there are any ways for you to do something small internally that allows for this conversation to start, that can be a really powerful way to show leaders, this doesn't have to be a big thing. Don't know why we're concerned about it. Let's do something so that we're really living up to what we say we want to do externally. This is deeply important. And not just celebrations, right? But doing some of that internal work is also something that might be missing from this space. So, okay, great. We have a couple more questions. So I want to maybe do one more actually, and then I'll need to close out, unfortunately. Okay. Is Black History Month a good time to be talking to our employees about intersectional identities, or is that making it too complex, taking away from the focus on Blackness? I think it's a great time to be talking about intersectional identities. One of the issues we sometimes see within organizations that are seeking to celebrate a particular community is that, based on the way leaders or just a company approaches a community, they make assumptions about the homogeneity of that community, or the one-dimensionalness of that community. The Black community, just like all of these other communities we talk about when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, is not one-dimensional, right? My experience as a Black woman is very different from someone else's experience as a Black man or as someone who is Black and non-binary. There are just so many, and that's just gender, right? We're talking about, ethnically, there are tons of different experiences out there, socioeconomically, all of the different ways that we intersect age and generations. And yes, this is a great time to talk about this because it impacts us very differently. I know that as someone who's Afro-Latina, it's very important to me that we talk about the intersectionality of the Latinx community when it comes to Black History Month, recognizing that there are many Black Latinos out there and Latinx people out there. So 1000%. And there are so many ways that you can do that. Okay, I am running out of time here. So I want to make sure we close out with the appropriate pieces. I will share my screen again and thank you all for your time here today. Just to close us out, if you are interested in learning more about us, you can find us at C Network LLC on Twitter, on Instagram. We're also C Network LLC on YouTube, and you can find us on LinkedIn, C Network with the @ which is how we really know ourselves. And then of course, there's a newsletter that you can subscribe to. We have a bunch of courses as well at courses.cnetwork.com. Okay, well, I hope you join us for our next Q&A, which is next month, and I will see you then. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.